Most people in that restaurant would remember the moment a stranger collapsed at table 6. What they never expected was that the quiet woman eating alone near the window would be the reason the story didn't end there. It was a cool Thursday evening in late October, and the Harbor Grill sat just 3 blocks from the waterfront. The dinner crowd was steady. Families talked over baskets of fries. Office workers relaxed after long shifts. A football game played silently on several screens mounted above the bar. Nothing about the evening felt unusual. Claire Whitaker liked it that way. She sat alone at table 11 with a half-finished burger, a glass of iced tea, and a paperback novel resting beside her plate. At 34 years old, Claire had mastered the art of becoming invisible. Her long brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore a gray sweatshirt, blue jeans, and running shoes that had seen better days. No jewelry except a thin silver bracelet hidden beneath her sleeve. No makeup. No attempt to stand out. If anyone noticed her at all, they probably assumed she was a nurse finishing a long shift. In a way, they would have been right. Claire worked at St. Matthew's Medical Center, one of the busiest hospitals in the county. Most people there knew her as dependable, quiet, and unusually calm under pressure. What nobody knew was that she always chose the same seat in restaurants. She always faced the main entrance. She always noticed every exit. She always watched reflections in windows without appearing to look. Habits formed years ago were difficult to erase. Across the room, laughter erupted from a group gathered around table 6. Several men in their 40s were celebrating something. One wore a company polo shirt. Another had a baseball cap turned backward. The tallest man sat with his back toward the wall, casually scanning the room while pretending not to. Claire noticed him immediately. Not because he was loud. Because he wasn't. His posture was relaxed but alert. His eyes tracked movement without lingering. Even from 30 feet away, something about him felt familiar. She returned to her book. A waitress walked past. "Need anything else, Han?" she asked. Claire smiled. "I'm good, thank you." The waitress nodded and moved on. A few minutes later, Claire's attention shifted again. The man at table 6 had stopped talking. Everyone else at the table continued their conversation, but he seemed distracted. His hand briefly touched the side of his neck. Then his wrist. Then the edge of the table. Small movements. Easy to miss. Claire noticed all of them. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She set her book down. Something wasn't right. Not yet serious. Not yet obvious. But enough to make the quiet voice in the back of her mind speak up. The same voice that had saved lives before. The same voice she had spent years trying to ignore. Then the man glanced across the room. For a split second, his eyes met hers. And something changed. For most people, eye contact lasts less than a second. This one lasted just long enough for Claire to know the man at table 6 understood exactly what was happening to him. There was no panic in his expression. No confusion. Only recognition. Then he looked away and forced a smile as one of his friends continued telling a story that had everyone else laughing. Claire remained still. Years of experience had taught her not to overreact. Sometimes people were tired. Sometimes they were distracted. Sometimes a strange feeling was nothing more than a strange feeling. But the voice in the back of her mind refused to go away. She glanced toward the man again. His posture had changed. Only slightly. Most people would never notice. One shoulder sat lower than the other. His breathing looked a little uneven. His right hand remained resting on the edge of the table as if he wanted to keep it there. Grounded. Stable. Controlled. Claire quietly slid her bookmark into her novel and closed it. Across the room, a server delivered another round of drinks. The men at the table thanked her. The man Claire had been watching lifted his glass but never took a sip. Instead, his gaze briefly swept the room again. Entrance. Windows. Kitchen door. Emergency exit. The pattern was familiar. Too familiar. Claire felt a small knot tighten in her stomach. He had military habits. Not the kind learned from a weekend training course. The kind built through years of repetition. The kind that never truly disappeared. A few minutes passed. The football game changed to a commercial. Someone dropped a fork near the bar. The restaurant continued moving through its ordinary evening rhythm. Then Claire noticed something else. The man reached toward his wristwatch. Not to check the time. To press a button. Once. Then twice. His movements were subtle enough that nobody else seemed to notice. Claire did. Her attention sharpened immediately. She had seen similar actions before. Not often. But enough. Her iced tea remained untouched as she watched. The man leaned slightly toward one of his friends and appeared to say something. The friend frowned. Then nodded. Whatever had been said seemed unimportant because the conversation continued normally. Yet the knot in Claire's stomach tightened further. She checked the wall clock. 8:23 p.m. outside, headlights moved past the restaurant windows. Inside, everything remained calm. Then the man exhaled slowly and looked directly toward her table again. This time there was no mistaking it. He was trying to communicate something. Not with words. With awareness. Claire's pulse increased slightly. Her training told her to stay seated. Her instincts told her to move. She trusted instincts. She always had. Quietly, she stood from table 11. Not because she knew what was about to happen. Because she suspected she might only have seconds to find out. Claire moved calmly between the tables, careful not to draw attention. To everyone else, she probably looked like a customer heading toward the restroom or stretching her legs after sitting too long. But her eyes never left the man at table 6. The closer she got, the more detail she noticed. A faint sheen of perspiration along his forehead despite the cool temperature inside the restaurant. Slight tension around his jaw. Controlled breathing that looked increasingly forced. Most people would have missed every one of those signs. Claire had spent too many years learning not to miss them. She stopped beside an empty table roughly 10 feet away and pretended to check a message on her phone. From there she could observe without appearing obvious. The man glanced toward her again. This time his expression changed. Not fear. Relief. It lasted only a fraction of a second before he looked away. Claire's pulse quickened. He knew she had noticed. That alone told her something was seriously wrong. One of his friends laughed and slapped him lightly on the shoulder. The man smiled politely but did not respond. Instead, he reached for a glass of water. His hand trembled. Barely. Just enough. The glass never made it to his lips. He set it back down. Claire immediately shifted her attention to his eyes. Focused. Alert. Yet fighting something. She had seen that look before. Years ago. In places she rarely allowed herself to remember. A server passed carrying a tray of food. The smell of grilled steak and baked potatoes filled the air. Conversations continued around them. The football game switched back from commercial break. Nobody else seemed aware that anything unusual was happening. Then the man adjusted his watch again. One press. Pause. Another press. Claire felt a chill run through her. It was deliberate. Not random. Not nervous behavior. Deliberate. She took another step closer. The man noticed immediately. His breathing became slightly heavier. One of his friends finally looked concerned. You okay, Mike? He asked. The man nodded. Just tired. His voice sounded steady. Too steady. Like someone making an effort to sound normal. Claire had heard that tone before too. Her instincts grew louder. The friends seemed satisfied and returned to the conversation. Claire was not. She quietly studied the man's wrist. The watch looked ordinary at first glance. Rugged. Dark casing. Military style. Then she noticed a small marking near the edge. Her eyes narrowed. Recognition flickered somewhere deep in her memory. Before she could place it, the man slowly turned his head toward her one final time. His lips moved. No sound reached her. Just 3 silent words. Claire read them instantly. Need help now. The knot in her stomach disappeared. In its place came certainty. Whatever was happening had reached the point where waiting was no longer an option. She took a breath and started toward table 6 just as the man's shoulders suddenly slumped and the room around him began to change. The change happened so quickly that most people did not understand what they were seeing. One moment the man was sitting upright at table 6. The next, his hands slipped from the edge of the table and his shoulders sagged forward. A fork clattered against a plate. One of his friends reached toward him. Mike, he asked. No answer came. The laughter around the table vanished instantly. Chairs shifted. Conversations nearby slowed as people turned to look. Claire covered the remaining distance in seconds. Years of training had taught her that the first few moments often mattered most. Not because of panic. Because of information. Information disappeared quickly when fear took over. She reached the table just as the man's eyes began losing focus. Mike, can you hear me? One of his friends asked. Claire gently placed 2 fingers against the man's wrist. Weak. Uneven. But present. Good. Very good. Someone call emergency services, one customer shouted from across the restaurant. Several people immediately reached for their phones. Claire never looked up. Her attention remained fixed on the man. She studied his breathing. His skin color. The tension in his neck muscles. Every detail mattered. Then something unexpected happened. The man's eyes opened slightly. He looked directly at Claire. Recognition appeared there again. For a brief second, he seemed relieved she was the one standing beside him. His lips moved. The words barely escaped. Table 6, Claire leaned closer. The restaurant noise faded into the background. I am listening, she said calmly. The man's breathing caught for a moment. Then he whispered 2 words that immediately changed the way Claire viewed the entire situation. Seal, coded, the words were quiet. Nearly impossible for anyone else to hear. But Claire heard them clearly. Her expression did not change. Inside, however, old memories stirred. Military terminology. Emergency recognition procedures. Signals meant for people who understood them. Signals that ordinary civilians would never recognize. One of the friends looked confused. What does that mean? He asked. Claire did not answer immediately. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the watch on the man's wrist. Suddenly she remembered where she had seen the marking before. Not in a hospital. Not in a classroom. Somewhere much farther away. Somewhere she had spent years trying to forget. Her pulse remained steady. The room around her grew louder as concern spread through the restaurant. Customers stood from their seats. Servers exchanged nervous glances. The manager hurried over. Is he okay? The manager asked. Claire finally looked up. I need space around him. Nothing else right now. Something in her voice carried quiet authority. People obeyed without argument. The manager immediately guided customers back. Chairs moved. A clear area formed around table 6. Claire returned her attention to the man. He was trying to tell her something. Not about what was happening. About who he was. And more importantly, who he believed she might be. The realization sent a chill through her. Because if he recognized her, then the past she had spent years hiding might have just walked back into her life. Claire forced herself to stay focused on the present. Whatever memories the man's words had awakened would have to wait. Right now, he needed help. She adjusted her position beside him and carefully observed every detail she could. His breathing remained steady enough to avoid immediate danger, but something was clearly wrong. More importantly, it was something he seemed to expect. That fact bothered her. Most medical emergencies arrived without warning. This felt different. The manager returned carrying a bottle of water and a towel. "Anything you need?" he asked. Claire shook her head. "Just keep the area clear." The manager nodded immediately. By now the entire restaurant was watching. Conversations had stopped completely. Even the television seemed quieter. One of the man's friends knelt nearby. "His name is Michael Turner," he said. "He was fine 5 minutes ago." Claire looked at him. "Has he mentioned any health issues recently?" The friend hesitated. "No. Nothing serious. He runs every morning. He works out. He is healthier than all of us." Claire nodded slowly. Healthy people could still carry hidden problems. She looked back at Michael. His eyes opened again for a brief moment. This time he seemed more aware. He studied her face carefully. Then his gaze shifted to the silver bracelet that had slipped partially from beneath her sleeve. His expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Recognition. Deep recognition. Claire noticed it immediately. Before she could pull the bracelet back beneath her sleeve, Michael's eyes widened slightly. "You," he whispered. The word barely escaped. Claire felt her stomach tighten. "Save your energy," she said quietly. Michael ignored the advice. "I know that bracelet." One of his friends looked confused. "What bracelet?" Claire gently pulled her sleeve down, hiding the silver band once again. "You are mistaken." But Michael gave a faint shake of his head. No, his breathing slowed. Fallujah. The single word hit Claire like a distant echo from another lifetime. Around them, nobody understood the significance. To everyone else it was just the name of a city. To Claire it was a place filled with memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. Long nights. Endless dust. Faces she still remembered. She kept her expression neutral. Years of practice made that easy. Inside, however, old doors were beginning to open. The sound of approaching sirens finally drifted through the restaurant windows. Emergency responders were only minutes away. Relief spread across several faces in the room. Claire felt relief too, but for a different reason. Once professionals arrived, she could disappear again. She could return to being an ordinary nurse finishing dinner after a long shift. Yet as she looked at Michael, she realized that possibility was fading quickly. Because the way he was looking at her now was not the look of someone who recognized a bracelet. It was the look of someone who recognized a person he never expected to see again. The sirens grew louder outside, echoing off the waterfront buildings as flashing lights reflected across the restaurant windows. Several customers visibly relaxed. Help was almost here. Claire wished she felt the same. Michael's recognition had changed everything. She kept her attention on him while trying to ignore the growing weight of old memories pressing against the edges of her mind. The bracelet was supposed to be meaningless now. Just a piece of silver. Just a reminder of people she had lost contact with years ago. Yet Michael had recognized it instantly. That meant he had been there. Or close enough to know the story behind it. Michael opened his eyes again. The effort seemed to cost him. His voice was weak but clearer than before. "You disappeared," he said quietly. One of his friends looked between them in confusion. "You two know each other?" Claire answered without looking away from Michael. No, it was technically true. She had never met him before. But Michael gave a faint smile. "Not me." He took a slow breath. "My team." Claire remained silent. The friend frowned. "What team?" Michael's eyes never left hers. "The team she saved." The words landed like a stone in still water. Nobody spoke for a moment. The manager stopped moving. A nearby server froze beside a table. Even the customers closest to them seemed to sense that something important had just been revealed. Claire immediately shook her head. "You should not be talking right now." Michael ignored her again. "We searched for years." His breathing steadied slightly as he spoke. "Nobody knew where you went." Claire glanced toward the front windows. The ambulance had arrived. Emergency responders were already entering the building carrying equipment. Relief should have followed. Instead, a strange feeling settled over the room. The lead paramedic approached quickly. "What do we have?" he asked. Claire calmly summarized everything she had observed. Her explanation was precise, organized, and detailed. The paramedic listened carefully. By the time she finished, his expression had changed. He no longer saw an ordinary customer. He saw someone with unusual experience. "Medical background?" he asked. Claire hesitated. "Nursing." The paramedic nodded, though something about her answer seemed incomplete. As his team began their assessment, Michael slowly raised a hand. "Wait." Everyone looked at him. His gaze remained fixed on Claire. "Tell me one thing." Claire did not respond. "Was it really you?" The restaurant fell completely silent. Michael swallowed and continued. "Fallujah. The medic they called Ghost 7. The name struck Claire harder than she expected. For years she had not heard it spoken aloud. Not once. Not by anyone. Around them, confusion spread through the room. Nobody understood what Ghost 7 meant. But they all understood one thing. The quiet nurse sitting alone at table 11 was clearly not who they thought she was. And for the first time that evening, Claire realized her past was no longer hiding. Claire did not answer immediately. The name hung in the air like something that did not belong in the restaurant. Ghost 7. To everyone else it sounded like a movie title or an old military nickname. To Claire it sounded like a door she had locked years ago suddenly swinging open. The paramedics continued their work, carefully preparing Michael for transport, but even they seemed distracted now. The lead paramedic glanced at Claire with growing curiosity. Michael watched her patiently. He was not demanding answers. He already believed he knew the truth. Claire looked down at her hands. They were steady, as always. That had never changed. What had changed was everything else. The hospital. The quiet apartment overlooking the river. The routine she had built one careful day at a time. All of it had been designed to leave the past behind. Yet here it was, standing in front of her through the eyes of a man she had never met. "That name does not matter anymore," she said softly. Michael gave a faint smile. "It mattered to us." One of his friends stepped closer. "Mike, what are you talking about?" Michael turned his head slightly. "Years ago, there was a medic." His voice was weak but steady. "People said she could walk into chaos and somehow make everyone calmer." Claire immediately looked away. She hated stories like that. They were never accurate. They ignored the mistakes. The losses. The people who never came home. Michael continued anyway. "Nobody knew much about her. Most of us never even saw her face." The friend looked confused. And you think that is her? Michael's answer came without hesitation. I know it is. Silence settled over the restaurant again. Even the customers furthest away were listening now. Claire wished they would not. She had spent years avoiding attention. Attention always led to questions. Questions always led backward. The lead paramedic finally spoke. Ma'am, if he is identifying you correctly, you must have had significant military medical experience. Claire met his eyes. A long time ago. That was all she offered. The paramedic nodded slowly. Somehow that simple answer seemed to confirm more than a detailed explanation ever could. Michael looked toward the silver bracelet hidden beneath her sleeve. You still wear it. Claire glanced down. Some things are hard to throw away. Michael smiled again. Good. The ambulance team finished preparing their equipment. Outside, flashing lights painted red and blue reflections across the windows. The moment was ending. Soon Michael would leave. The restaurant would return to normal. People would tell stories about the strange evening they witnessed. Claire hoped that would be the end of it. Then the front door opened. A tall man stepped inside wearing a dark jacket with a small navy insignia near the shoulder. His eyes swept across the room once. The moment they landed on Claire, he stopped walking. Complete disbelief crossed his face. For several seconds he simply stared. Then he quietly whispered words that sent a chill through everyone close enough to hear them. No way. Ghost 7 is really alive. The room remained silent after the man's words. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Even the paramedics seemed frozen for a moment as they looked from the newcomer to Claire and back again. The tall man near the entrance took a slow step forward. His eyes never left her face. Claire immediately recognized what he was feeling because she had seen it before. Not fear. Not shock. Recognition mixed with disbelief. The kind of expression people wore when they discovered that a story they thought was a legend had actually been real. Ryan? Michael said weakly from the stretcher. The newcomer finally looked away from Claire long enough to nod. I came as soon as I got the alert. Several people in the restaurant exchanged confused glances. Alert? What alert? Ryan seemed to realize what he had revealed and shook his head slightly. His attention returned to Claire. We thought you were gone. Claire sighed quietly. I was never gone. Ryan almost laughed. You vanished from every record we could find. Claire did not answer. Because he was right. Years ago, after leaving military service, she had made a deliberate choice. No interviews. No reunions. No ceremonies. No public recognition. She had wanted a simple life. A hospital badge. Quiet shifts. Ordinary conversations. That had been enough. Until tonight. Michael smiled faintly from the stretcher. I told them nobody disappears forever. One of his friends finally stepped forward. Can somebody please explain what is happening? Ryan glanced toward him. Then toward the crowd gathered around the restaurant. He seemed unsure how much to say. Michael solved the problem himself. Years ago, he said slowly, there was a medic attached to several special operations teams. Claire immediately looked away. She hated where this conversation was going. Michael continued anyway. Whenever things went wrong, people hoped she would be there. Ryan nodded. Because she always found a way to keep people going. Claire shook her head. That is not how I remember it. Ryan smiled sadly. That is because you remember the people you could not help. We remember the people who came home. The words landed heavily. For the first time all evening, Claire had no response. The paramedics gently began moving the stretcher toward the exit. Michael looked relieved now. Stronger. More comfortable. Before reaching the door, he looked back one final time. "You know," he said, "there is something I never told anyone." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What?" Michael smiled. "The reason I recognized you was not the bracelet." Claire frowned slightly. "Then what was it?" Michael pointed toward the paperback novel still sitting forgotten on table 11. "Only one person I ever met carried that book everywhere." Claire stared at him. Ryan laughed softly in disbelief. Michael continued. "There is a photograph from 20 years ago. A medic sitting on an ammo crate reading the exact same novel during a sandstorm." The restaurant went silent again. Claire looked at the book. Then at Michael. Then at Ryan. For the first time that evening, she realized something she had never considered. Maybe she had not hidden from the past nearly as well as she thought she had. The ambulance doors closed gently and the flashing lights began to move away from the restaurant. For several moments nobody inside spoke. It felt as though the entire evening had paused between one chapter and the next. Claire remained standing beside table 6, looking at the empty chair where Michael had been sitting only minutes earlier. The paperback novel still rested on table 11 exactly where she had left it. The manager approached first. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I do not think any of us are going to forget tonight." Claire offered a small smile. It was just another patient. Several people exchanged glances. Nobody seemed willing to accept that explanation anymore. Ryan stepped closer, hands in his jacket pockets. "You always say that." Claire looked at him. "Because it is true." Ryan shook his head slowly. "No. Most people would have finished dinner and waited for the professionals. You saw something nobody else saw." Claire glanced toward the window where the ambulance lights had disappeared into the distance. "That comes from experience." Ryan laughed softly. "You still make it sound simple." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Ryan reached into his pocket and removed a small folded photograph. The edges were worn from age. He handed it to her. Claire unfolded it carefully. The image showed a much younger version of herself sitting on an equipment crate with a book in her hands. Around her stood several smiling service members. Some faces she recognized immediately. Others took a second longer. A few made her chest tighten. Ryan watched quietly. "That photograph has been passed around our community for years," he said. "Most people thought the medic in it was impossible to find." Claire stared at the image. Then she folded it and handed it back. "People should spend less time looking backward." Ryan smiled. "Maybe. But some people never forgot what you did for them." The restaurant slowly returned to life around them. Customers resumed conversations. Servers carried food. The football game continued on the screens overhead. Ordinary life had returned. Claire picked up her novel and reached for her bill. The manager immediately shook his head. "Dinner is on the house." Claire sighed. "You do not have to do that." "Maybe not," the manager replied, "but I want to." Claire finally accepted. As she walked toward the exit, Ryan called after her. "What happens now?" Claire stopped near the door. She thought about the hospital waiting for her tomorrow morning. The patients she would meet. The quiet routine she had built. Then she thought about Michael's words. Ghost 7 survived. A name she had buried. A past that had somehow found her anyway. Claire smiled faintly. "Tomorrow," she said, "I go back to work." Ryan laughed. "Of course you do." She stepped outside into the cool night air and started walking toward the waterfront. Behind her, people were still talking about the mysterious nurse from table 11. Ahead of her, the city lights reflected across the dark water. And for the first time in many years, Claire wondered whether the next knock on her door might come from someone else who remembered a story she thought the world had forgotten.